in a way, it makes me think of Just Stop Oil and the people who block traffic. How many times have we sat here and listened perhaps to, shall we say, less thoughtful elements of the British media discussing protests? Protests that are for the collective good rather than for the protection of wealth. So the kind of people who think you shouldn't protest about environmental catastrophe or about the carnage that's unfolding in Gaza are the kind of people who, if you offered them an opportunity to march on Parliament protesting about VAT being put on private school fees, they would probably trample you in their mad rush to Westminster Tube Station. So it's a crucial distinction between two types of protest. One is for collective good, protests against other people being deported, for example, or protests against your own wealth being limited. So the farmers will protest because they are being required to pay half of the inheritance tax that everybody else with a similar sized estate is required to pay. I don't know how stupid you would have to be to march in solidarity with them, but there's nothing stupid about being a farmer who marches to protect their own privileged inheritance status, because who here would volunteer to give up an enormous financial privilege? Takes us back to the pensioners. And so it is with Just Stop Oil, or these are people who protest in the belief, the sincere and authentic belief, that unless serious changes are made to the way the world works, then we are jeopardizing the future of our species. They are not protesting for their own financial to protect their own financial situation or the wealth that they hope to pass on to their children. So two types of protesters, two types of protest. Protest for the public good. You may disagree about what the public good is, but you can't disagree about these two types of protests. And protests for the protection, the preservation of a status quo which favours you, right? So there it is. Which brings us to Greta Thunberg, who is in many ways the face of public protest on the environmental front. She is in many ways the rallying point. There was always a tragedy, not a tragedy, there was always a big problem on the horizon for Greta Thunberg. Do you know what it was? Looking back now, it was blindingly obvious what it was. But I'm not sure we fully clocked it at the time. She didn't get a free pass. Even as a schoolgirl, she was exposed to vicious abuse, hideous abuse online, which some people have suggested that her neurodiversity may have equipped her with an ability to rise above it in the way that other people may not have been able to. But she was always going to get older. So the hatred that is reserved for people who protest for the public good, people who challenge a status quo that rewards fossil fuel companies and the richest people on the planet are given everything they need to grow ever richer, while the rest of us, as the last hour reminded us, often move in the opposite direction. Anybody who stands up for that is painting a target on their back that is almost impossible to conceive of. And somehow she managed to swerve the worst excesses of that by being so young and by being possessed of such courage, such a personality that she possessed. But they were always going to come for her, regardless of what she did next, because you can't sustain a system that pollutes the planet and continues to enrich the richest people on it at the expense of the survival potentially of the species, without crushing dissent, without silencing all criticism. What you see Donald Trump doing with regard to his immigration policies at the moment is a sort of microcosm of what the world has been doing since 1959 when it comes to fossil fuels and climate change. But then she began to campaign in other areas as well, most obviously and most recently against the continuing blockade of Gaza. Hands up, and you have to be completely honest about this, hands up if you knew that it was impossible to get anything into Gaza and had been for weeks. Hands up if you knew that the place was under an effective blockade. How many people, hands up if you know how many people have been killed by the Israeli army in the last week or the last fortnight. Hands up if you know how many people have been shot dead while trying to get their hands on some of the pitiful amounts of aid that are being allowed into the region under an Israeli and American plan that is objected to by pretty much everybody else on the planet. Go on, hands up. Hands up. Do you see what I mean? Because we always end up circling back to the same space when we talk about protests for the public good. And that is, oh, I wish they wouldn't do it, but if they didn't, then we wouldn't be talking about it. You know, yesterday, if you didn't want to talk about the ongoing carnage in Gaza, you would have been talking instead about an ill-advised little film that Dawn French made on social media and then apologised for and deleted. So if you don't want to acknowledge, particularly if you've been a full-throated cheerleader for everything that Benjamin Netanyahu has done since the October the 7th atrocity, you'd probably rather talk about Dawn French than the death toll. You'd probably rather talk about Greta Thunberg than the dead aid workers. You'd probably rather talk about any of these things than the 54,000 Palestinians killed in the fighting, mostly as a result of Israeli airstrikes, rendering Gaza one of, if not the, most dangerous war zone in the world. So Greta Thunberg decided to draw attention to the blockade in the first instance and the bigger situation in the second, in the sort of broader. And as I'm pretty sure she knew would happen, she got, what word do you prefer now? Captured, kidnapped, incarcerated, confiscated, arrested? I don't know if she was arrested. What word do you prefer? Israeli commandos boarded the ship and the pro-Palestinian activists put their hands up. So I don't know what word you prefer to use in those circumstances. I don't know if anybody thought that they would get to Gaza on the ship called the Madleen. And of course they were carrying only a small amount of aid. But the message was pretty obvious. The world should not turn a blind eye to the suffering of Palestinians. And that's where we come in. Did it work? And how do you answer that question? So here's a headline that the Times newspaper ran with today. Phones overboard as Greta's, quotes, selfie yacht, end quotes, mission is sunk. Selfie yacht, I think, is the description that was applied to the mission by the Israeli government, and headline writers all over the place have decided to run with it. It's not a value-free word, is it? That's not a value-free headline. Even if you stick it in quotes, you're electing to describe these events in the language that the Israeli administration prefers. You're not describing it, for example, as a humanitarian mission. Phones overboard as Greta's humanitarian mission is sunk. Phones overboard as Greta's attempt to draw attention to the ongoing blockade is sunk. And that is what informs my question, because wherever you look at this story, you find yourself wondering how distorting is the lens through which we're looking at it. Because, listen, if there's any doubt at all, what they have done is courageous and important. But that doesn't necessarily mean it has been effective. People who would rather talk about Greta Thunberg than dead aid workers have been talking about Greta Thunberg. Yesterday they were probably talking about Dawn French. But are they ever going to apologise, or to go back to a theme in the last hour, for their full-throated support of everything Benjamin Netanyahu has done long after it became clear what his intentions were? Of course they're not. They'd rather talk about Greta Thunberg. But the alternative to talking about Greta Thunberg was not talking about dead aid workers or starving children. The alternative was not to talk about it at all. And always in danger of letting the perfect be the enemy of the good. Perfect world. Well, there'd be no killing in Gaza. There'd have been no October the 7th atrocity. There would be no need for aid, let alone a blockade of aid. But we don't live in a perfect world. So we live in gradations of imperfection. And in a less imperfect world, journalists would be allowed in to Gaza. In a less imperfect world, these children would be fed. You wouldn't put the prisoners in charge, you wouldn't put the prison guards in charge of the care packages, would you? In a less imperfect world, that would be an obvious thing to do. So, 3 a.m. local time yesterday morning, the boat was covered with white foam, which the media in Israel said was non-harmful paint used to obscure it during boarding. Make of that what you will. They refused to turn around, and soldiers used paint, which is not harmful or dangerous, to stop the boat violating the blockade, the blockade that stops people from delivering aid to Gaza. The activists said they were prepared and had all practiced for this. And one of them described the deployment of this paint as them dropping chemicals on us. I don't know, because we haven't been able to hear from them yet. We for a while didn't even know where they were. But we do know that the attention of the world has focused upon this mission in a way that it would not have done if this young lady was not there. The attention of the world, even the parts of the world that would in many ways rather not talk about it at all, has been grabbed by this young woman. It's possible that had she not been there, it may have ended in circumstances more similar to what happened in 2010, when a Turkish ship tried to break the blockade on Gaza, a ship called Mavi Marmara. Do you know this story? Hands up if you know this story. Because that saw 10 activists being killed. It caused diplomatic relations between Turkey and Israel to be very badly affected, but many more were injured. 10 activists were actually killed when the Israeli military boarded a boat trying to do exactly what Greta Thunberg's boat was trying to do. So they would have been well aware of what a tragic, what a fatal escalation would look like, which will explain some of their behavior, some of their tactics. And inevitably, the Israeli government tries to turn it into a propaganda victory, saying it was Instagram activism and the show is over, ignoring the historic blockade, ignoring the consequences of it, and encouraging people instead to sort of laugh at the notion of the celebrities being transferred to Gaza through humanitarian channels. I don't know. I know I say that a lot at the moment, but it's about getting people who aren't talking about it to talk about it, right? That, I think, is the mission. And in one sense, it has worked. The usual suspects will be queuing up to attack this young woman because she is all the things they hate. She doesn't fear them, most obviously. She is courageous, clear-eyed, and authentic. You may not agree with her about things, but you can't fault her integrity. She is kryptonite to the kind of people that put characters like Donald Trump and Boris Johnson in power. She's absolute kryptonite to authoritarian regimes, because she's managed to harness public opinion in a way that few people do. It's a once-in-a-generation phenomenon, what Greta Thunberg has achieved. But what has she achieved on this? Because if you were already talking about it a lot, is this a win? Is it now, as public opinion finally, long after, I think in a balanced universe, long after it should have done, public opinion, international opinion, even the UK government's opinion is shifting firmly into negative territory when it comes to what Netanyahu continues to do. But unless you're heavily invested in the story, in which case you didn't need this mission to be undertaken to draw your attention to it, I wonder if you knew. So, has it worked? 0345 6060 I do know, actually, what my opinion is. I said to you in the first hour sometimes I don't know what my answer to the question I'm asking you is until I've actually articulated it out loud. Yeah, I think this has worked incredibly well. I think that's why the response is being so negative. I think that's why they're so spooked. I think that's why the Israeli government is reduced to trolling on X. People who were prepared to risk their lives. And of course, the Israeli government can't admit that. The Israeli government can't say, oh, last time they did this, we killed 10 of them. So it's an incredibly brave thing for them to have done. We have a well-established history of shooting people like this on boats like that. But Greta Thunberg's status is such that the eyes of the world would have been on this boat in ways that perhaps were not the case back in 2010 when the Mavi Marmara undertook a similar mission. You've also got elected politicians on the boat, various activists from various countries. It's so easy when you look at things like this through the distorted lens of coverage. And remember, almost all the media in this country has been very slow to reach the conclusion that Netanyahu's mission has moved from retaliation to something much, much uglier. Whether you want to use the word genocide, as Kenneth Roth, the head of Human Rights Watch for 30 years, explained to me a month ago he feels duty-bound to use, or whether you're just comfortable leaving it at ethnic cleansing, is moot in a way. That's what's happening now. And Greta Thunberg felt that the world was looking away. Has it worked? 0345 6060973 is the number you need. So, I mean, I got one here. Here's a message. Has she mentioned the hostages? To which the answer is she doesn't need to, because everybody is talking about the hostages all the time. Any coverage of this issue is predicated upon the desire to see the hostages released, until you reach the point where Benjamin Netanyahu decided to abandon the plan that would have secured the release of all the hostages, or the fact that members of his government have made it clear that that was never their priority at all. But it's whataboutery to say that. It's very successful and effective whataboutery. But if you're on a mission to draw attention to the blockade of Gaza that has been in place since long before the October the 7th terror attacks, the only reason why you're saying, has she mentioned the hostages, is because you don't want attention to be paid to the continuing blockade and the continuing starvation of children. You can hold two thoughts in your head at the same time. How many conversations about the terror attack on October the 7th contained recognition of the continuing plight of Palestinian people? How many corners in the British media would say, obviously this terror attack is absolutely disgusting, but, and then give you a quick history lesson on the plight of the Palestinian people? Answer: none, because it would have been whataboutery. At the time of that terror attack, the story was the terror attack. At the time of this mission to Gaza, the story is this mission to Gaza. Has it worked? Has it worked? How brave is she? She knows. I couldn't do it. Could you? Why do they hate her so much? Is it because she's a woman? Is it because she's, I don't know, she refuses to be frightened of them? Sort of cowardly men sitting in newspaper offices and studios around the world, absolutely livid with this young woman. For what? Holding up a mirror? Showing them the cowardice that lurks within them, that they spend their entire lives trying to ignore or deny? I don't know. I think this has been a great success.